My name is Serafina, I'm 32, and last Thanksgiving changed everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. What started as a casual comment from my mother about seating arrangements at dinner became the catalyst that exposed 20 years of lies, favoritism, and a betrayal so deep it shattered 3 generations of our family tree. The moment my parents told me my adopted children shouldn't sit at the main table with the real grandchildren, I realized the golden child narrative I'd lived under was built on foundations far more sinister than simple preference. Hey, everyone. Before we dive into this wild family drama, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers worldwide. If you're ready for a story about family betrayals that'll make your jaw drop, smash that like button and subscribe because this revenge tale has more twists than a pretzel factory. Trust me, you'll want to see how this plays out. The Thanksgiving incident happened at my childhood home in suburban Connecticut, where my parents Margaret and Robert Whitmore had hosted family gatherings for over 3 decades. I arrived with my husband, Marcus, and our 2 adopted children, 8-year-old Zoe and 6-year-old Ethan, both biracial kids we'd welcomed into our hearts 2 years earlier, after a lengthy adoption process. My sister Chelsea was already there with her husband Brad and their 3 biological children, Madison Connor and baby Harper. The house buzzed with the usual holiday energy, but something felt different immediately. Mom's hugs seemed shorter, Dad barely acknowledged Marcus, and I noticed how they fawned over Chelsea's kids while offering only polite smiles to mine. The breaking point came when Mom was setting the dining room table. I offered to help, suggesting we might need the extension since we had 11 people total. That's when she dropped the bomb with casual cruelty that still makes my blood boil. Actually, Serafina, I was thinking your family could eat in the kitchen this year. The dining room table is for immediate family and well. She paused, glancing at Zoe and Ethan who were playing nearby. Your sister's children shouldn't have to feel uncomfortable around you. No, different children at such a traditional family gathering. I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. Excuse me, it's nothing personal, sweetheart. It's just that Zoe and Ethan aren't really Whitmore grandchildren, are they? They're lovely children, don't get me wrong, but family dinners should be for blood relatives. Chelsea's children need to understand their heritage and family traditions without complications. The word complications hung in the air like poison gas. My adopted children, my children, were complications. Marcus appeared beside me, his jaw clenched, having heard enough to understand we were being segregated in my own childhood home. Mom, those are my children. They are Whitmore grandchildren because they're my children. Dad emerged from his study, adjusting his reading glasses with that dismissive expression I remembered from childhood disagreements. Serafina, don't be dramatic. Your mother's just trying to keep things simple. The kids won't even notice. But Zoe had noticed. I saw her little face fall as she processed the adults' conversation, her bright smile fading into confusion. Ethan, younger but equally perceptive, moved closer to Marcus's leg, sensing the tension. Chelsea, ever the diplomatic golden child, swooped in with her trademark fake concern. Sarah, maybe it would be more comfortable for everyone. The kitchen table is actually really cozy, and the kids can be louder in there without worrying about the good china. That's when something clicked into place, a pattern I'd been blind to for years. Chelsea's immediate support of our parents' segregation wasn't surprising. It was expected. She'd always been their favorite, the one who could do no wrong, while I'd struggled for scraps of approval my entire life. But this felt bigger than typical golden child dynamics. When did you all discuss this? I asked slowly, looking between my parents and sister. Because this sounds like a planned conversation. The guilty glances they exchanged confirmed my suspicions. This hadn't been a spontaneous decision. They'd coordinated this humiliation. We just thought, Mom began, but I cut her off. No. Absolutely not. If my children aren't welcome at the family table, then we're not staying. Serafina, you're overreacting, Dad said with that patronizing tone that had dominated my childhood. We're trying to be practical here. Practical, my voice rose. You're asking me to segregate my own children because they don't share your DNA? Marcus was already moving quietly, gathering our coats while keeping his voice low and calm. Kids, come get your jackets. We're going to have Thanksgiving at our house instead. Chelsea's mask slipped slightly, revealing something that looked almost like panic. Sarah, don't leave over this. Mom didn't mean it the way it sounded. But I was done pretending their behavior was acceptable. As we headed toward the door, Mom made one final attempt at manipulation. If you leave now, Serafina, don't expect us to pretend this tantrum didn't happen. There will be consequences for choosing outsiders over your real family. Outsiders. She'd called my children outsiders. That night, after putting Zoe and Ethan to bed and explaining that sometimes grown-ups make poor choices that have nothing to do with how wonderful children are, I couldn't shake the feeling that this went deeper than holiday seating arrangements. The coordination between my parents and Chelsea, the careful choice of words, the immediate assumption that I'd comply, it all suggested a level of planning and discussion that excluded me entirely. I started thinking about other family dynamics I'd overlooked. How Chelsea always seemed to know about family financial decisions before me. How my parents had contributed significantly to her wedding while giving us a modest check for ours. How they'd immediately offered to help with her children's college funds but had never mentioned ours. Marcus found me at 2 in the morning sitting at our kitchen table with a cup of cold tea and a legal pad covered in notes about family interactions I'd previously dismissed as coincidence. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling beside me. "I'm thinking about how they've been treating our family differently for months, maybe years, and I just accepted it as normal. But tonight wasn't about Thanksgiving dinner placement, Marcus. Tonight was about establishing a hierarchy where my children, our children, are permanently second-class citizens in their own extended family." He nodded, understanding immediately. "So what do you want to do about it?" That question would haunt me for days because the answer that came to mind wasn't about forgiveness or family reconciliation. It was about justice, consequences, and making sure my children never again felt like outsiders in their own family story. But first, I needed to understand exactly how deep this betrayal went, and who else might be involved in treating my family as expendable. The next morning brought an unexpected text from my cousin Derek, Dad's nephew, who lived across the country but stayed plugged into family gossip through social media and holiday phone calls. His message was simple but revealing. "Heard about yesterday. Mom told me Margaret's been saying some pretty awful stuff about your kids for months. Thought you should know." I called Derek immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed. What he told me during our 40-minute conversation shattered any remaining illusions about family loyalty and revealed a campaign of character assassination that had been building since our adoption was finalized. According to Derek, Mom had been systematically poisoning family opinion against Marcus and our children during their regular phone calls with extended relatives. She described our adoption as Serafina's midlife crisis, suggested that we'd taken on more than we could handle with troubled children, and repeatedly emphasized that Zoe and Ethan would never really be Whitmore's no matter what the paperwork said. Worse, she'd been sharing private information about our family finances, medical decisions, and parenting choices with anyone who would listen, always framed as concern but clearly designed to undermine our credibility as parents and family members. She told Aunt Patricia that you guys were struggling financially because of the adoption costs and therapy expenses. Derek explained, his voice heavy with disgust. "She made it sound like you were irresponsible for taking on children with special needs when you couldn't afford it." The irony was breathtaking. Zoe and Ethan didn't have special needs. They were healthy, happy children who'd adapted beautifully to our family. But Mom had apparently created an entire narrative about our incompetence and their problems to justify her treatment of them. "There's more, Sarah." Chelsea's been backing up every story, adding details about how overwhelmed you seem when she visits how the kids are acting out because they miss their real parents. She's been building a case that you made a mistake adopting them. I felt something cold and calculating settle in my chest, replacing the hurt and confusion of the previous day. This wasn't about seating arrangements or family traditions. This was about a deliberate campaign to isolate my family and justify treating my children as unwelcome outsiders. After hanging up with Derek, I spent the rest of the morning researching family legal rights, adoption law, and grandparents' rights in Connecticut. What I discovered was both reassuring and infuriating. My parents had no legal standing to interfere with our family decisions, but they had significant social power within our extended family network that they'd been wielding like a weapon. Marcus found me in our home office, surrounded by printed articles and legal documents making detailed notes about every family interaction I could remember from the past 2 years. "You're building a case," he observed, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I'm documenting a pattern," I corrected. "Because I think we're going to need evidence of what they've been doing." He picked up one of my timeline sheets, scanning the entries I'd made about missed birthday calls, last-minute holiday plan changes, and Chelsea's suspicious knowledge of our personal business. "What's the endgame here, Sarah? Are you planning to confront them directly?" I looked up from my notes, feeling clearer about our situation than I had in months. "I'm planning to protect our children and make sure this never happens to another family member who doesn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable." That afternoon, I started making strategic phone calls. First to Derek's mother, Aunt Patricia, who confirmed that she'd been receiving regular updates about our struggles and had been told that we might not be able to handle the children long term. Then to my college roommate, Sarah, who worked in family services and could help me understand what resources were available if my parents escalated their behavior. Sarah's advice was both practical and sobering. Document everything, keep records of all communications, and establish clear boundaries with consequences. But Sarah, you need to prepare for the possibility that they'll choose their narrative over your family's well-being. By evening, I had a clear picture of the campaign against us and a preliminary plan for responding. But first, I needed to test my theory about Chelsea's role in this situation. I crafted a careful text message to my sister, striking a conciliatory tone. "Hey Chelsea, I've been thinking about yesterday and wondering if we could talk privately before I decide how to handle things with Mom and Dad. Could we meet for coffee this week? I value your perspective on family stuff." Her response came within minutes, which told me she'd been expecting some kind of contact. "Of course, I've been so worried about you since you left. How about Tuesday morning? I can meet anywhere that works for you." The speed and tone of her response confirmed my suspicions. She wasn't worried about family harmony or my feelings. She was worried about damage control. I suggested a coffee shop near her house, a public place where she'd feel comfortable talking but where I could control the conversation. Then I spent Monday evening preparing for what would either be a genuine conversation about family healing or confirmation that my sister was actively working against my family's interests. Marcus helped me think through conversation strategies, potential responses to deflection and gaslighting, and ways to gather information without revealing how much I already knew about their coordinated campaign. "Remember," he said as we finalized our approach, "the goal isn't to change her mind or get an apology. The goal is to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with so we can make informed decisions about protecting our family." Tuesday morning, I drove to the coffee shop with a small digital recorder in my purse. Connecticut is a one-party consent state for recording conversations and a clear sense of what I needed to learn. I was no longer the confused, hurt daughter who'd fled Thanksgiving dinner. I was a mother gathering intelligence about threats to her children's emotional well-being. Chelsea was already waiting when I arrived, her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer outfit creating the familiar impression of having everything together that had defined our relationship since childhood. But today I noticed the calculation behind her concerned smile, the way she'd chosen a corner table where she could see the entire coffee shop, and how her phone was positioned for easy access. She was prepared for this conversation in a way that suggested she'd been planning it long before I'd reached out. Chelsea's performance that Tuesday morning was Academy Award worthy. She opened with tears, apologizing for not standing up more forcefully during the Thanksgiving incident, claiming she'd been caught off guard by our parents' behavior and didn't know how to handle the situation without making things worse. "I've been losing sleep over this, Sarah," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You know how Mom and Dad can be when they get an idea in their heads. I was trying to keep the peace, but I realize now that I should have supported you immediately. For about 10 minutes, I almost believed her. Chelsea had always been good at reading people and telling them what they wanted to hear. But then I started asking specific questions about the family phone calls Derek had mentioned. I'm confused about something, I said carefully, sipping my latte and watching her expression. Derek mentioned that Mom's been discussing our family with relatives for months. Did you know about those conversations? Chelsea's micro-expressions betrayed her before her words did. A slight tightening around her eyes, a pause just long enough to formulate a response. I mean, you know how Mom is. She worries about everyone and sometimes she overshares when she's concerned. What exactly has she been sharing? Nothing serious, just, normal grandparent stuff. Wondering how the kids are adjusting, whether you guys need any help with anything. Her voice had taken on that slightly higher pitch that meant she was lying, a tell I'd recognized since we were teenagers. I decided to test the waters with information I knew was false. I appreciate her concern, but I wish she'd come to me directly, instead of telling people we're having financial problems because of the adoption costs. Chelsea's relief was visible. Oh, that. She didn't mean anything bad by it. She's just worried because adoptions can be expensive and she knows Marcus had that job change last year. Except Marcus hadn't had a job change last year. His promotion had come with a significant salary increase, information that Chelsea couldn't have known unless someone had told her incorrect information or she'd been sharing fabricated stories about our finances. Actually, Marcus got promoted last year. His salary increased by almost 40%. Did Mom not mention that part? The color drained from Chelsea's face as she realized she'd just confirmed that she'd been actively participating in spreading misinformation about our family situation. Maybe I misunderstood what she said. You know how these phone conversations can get confusing. That's when I decided to stop dancing around the issue. Chelsea, I know about the coordinated campaign. I know about the phone calls to extended family, the stories about us being overwhelmed and the kids acting out the suggestions that we might not be able to handle them long term. What I don't understand is why you've been helping Mom destroy my family's reputation. Her mask finally slipped completely. Instead of denial or continued deflection, Chelsea's expression hardened into something I'd never seen before, cold calculation mixed with genuine resentment. You want to know why, she said, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms. Because you've always gotten everything handed to you, Sierra. The perfect marriage, the successful career, and now you get to play saint by adopting disadvantaged children, and everyone's supposed to praise you for your noble sacrifice. I stared at her, genuinely shocked by the venom in her voice. Chelsea, what are you talking about? You've been Mom and Dad's favorite since we were kids. Favorite, she laughed bitterly. I've been their project. The daughter who needed constant guidance, whose husband they had to help financially, whose children they had to support because Brad and I can't afford everything they need. You've been their success story, the independent one who never needed anything from them. The puzzle pieces started falling into place. Chelsea's resentment wasn't about adoption or family traditions. It was about financial dependence and the perception that I'd achieved independence while she'd remained reliant on our parents' support. So you decided to make sure my children would never be accepted as equal grandchildren. I decided to protect my children's inheritance and their relationship with their grandparents, she said bluntly. If Mom and Dad get too attached to Zoe and Ethan, that's 4 grandchildren instead of 3, splitting their attention and resources. My kids shouldn't have to compete with adopted children for their own grandparents' love. There it was, the ugly truth behind months of systematic alienation. Chelsea viewed my children as threats to her own children's inheritance and grandparental relationship. She'd been actively working to ensure that Zoe and Ethan would never be considered equal family members. And Mom and Dad are okay with this reasoning. Mom and Dad understand practical realities, Chelsea said coldly. They've invested 30 years in raising us and building family wealth. They shouldn't have to redirect that investment toward children who aren't genetically connected to our family line. I felt my phone buzzing with a text message and glanced down to see a message from Marcus' recording app working. Stay safe. Right, the recording app. I'd been so shocked by Chelsea's honesty that I'd almost forgotten I was documenting this conversation for potential future use. So, the Thanksgiving dinner segregation was planned in advance, I asked, making sure to get clear confirmation on the record. Of course it was planned. We discussed it weeks ago. Mom wanted to establish boundaries early so your kids wouldn't expect equal treatment at future family events. And you supported that decision. I encouraged it, Chelsea said proudly. My children deserve to know they're special to their grandparents. They shouldn't have to wonder if they're competing with adopted kids for attention at every family gathering. After another 20 minutes of conversation where Chelsea revealed additional details about their strategy for marginalizing our family, I thanked her for her honesty and left the coffee shop with everything I needed to understand the full scope of what we were dealing with. That evening, Marcus and I listened to the recording together, both of us stunned by how completely Chelsea had revealed their motivations and methods. This wasn't about family tradition or sudden prejudice. It was about calculated financial and emotional resource protection. She basically admitted to a conspiracy to alienate our children from their extended family, Marcus said after we'd heard the recording twice. Which gives us everything we need to make informed decisions about how to respond, I replied, already thinking about next steps. But first I needed to reach out to the family members who'd been receiving false information about us and give them the opportunity to hear our side of the story directly. If Chelsea and my parents wanted to play games with family relationships, they were about to learn that I'd inherited more of Dad's strategic thinking than they'd realized. The war for our family's dignity was just beginning, and I was no longer playing defense. Armed with Chelsea's recorded confession and a clear understanding of their strategy, I spent the next week executing what Marcus dubbed Operation Family Truth. My first move was reaching out to every relative who'd received misinformation about our family, starting with Aunt Patricia. The conversation with Patricia was enlightening and infuriating. She'd been told that Zoe had serious behavioral issues stemming from abandonment trauma, and that Ethan was struggling academically because he couldn't adapt to our family's expectations. None of this was true. Both children were thriving in school and at home, but Patricia had been genuinely concerned about our well-being based on these fabricated reports. Margaret made it sound like you were in over your heads, Patricia explained during our phone call. She said Chelsea was worried sick about you but didn't know how to help without overstepping boundaries. I played Patricia selected portions of Chelsea's recorded confession, focusing on her admission that she'd deliberately encouraged our parents to exclude my children to protect her own children's inheritance prospects. Patricia's silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped, that calculating little. Patricia finally said, her voice tight with anger. Serafina, I owe you such an apology. We've been completely manipulated. Similar conversations with Uncle James' cousin Derek's parents and family friends revealed the extensive network of lies Chelsea and my parents had constructed. Each person I contacted expressed shock at learning they'd been fed false information and anger at being used as unwitting participants in isolating our family. But the real breakthrough came when I contacted my parents' longtime neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who'd known our family for over 20 years. She revealed something that changed everything I thought I understood about the situation. Your mother's been saying terrible things about those beautiful children for months, Mrs. Chen told me during an impromptu coffee meeting. But what really concerned me was when she started talking about legal ways to protect the family assets from being diluted by non-biological claims. Legal ways. Asset protection. Non-biological claims. That evening I called my friend Sarah, who worked in family services, and asked her about inheritance law and adopted children's rights. What she told me made my blood run cold. Adopted children have the same legal inheritance rights as biological children, Sarah. If your parents are talking about asset protection in the context of your kids, they might be planning to restructure their wills or establish trusts that exclude adopted grandchildren. The next morning, I made an appointment with a family law attorney recommended by Sarah. During our consultation, the attorney confirmed my worst fears: grandparents could legally structure their estates to exclude adopted grandchildren if they were careful about the language used in their wills and trusts. The fact that they're discussing this openly suggests they're already consulting with estate planning attorneys, the lawyer explained. You should consider having your own legal counsel review any family financial documents you have access to. That's when I remembered the family trust documents Dad had shared with me 5 years earlier, when I'd been designated as a potential successor trustee. I'd signed the paperwork without reading it carefully, trusting that family financial planning was straightforward and equitable. I spent that weekend reviewing every family financial document I could find, including trust, paperwork, insurance policies, and estate planning materials my parents had shared over the years. What I discovered was a pattern of language that consistently distinguished between natural grandchildren and other family members, with inheritance provisions that heavily favored biological descendants. The smoking gun came in a document dated just 3 months after our adoption was finalized, an amendment to the family trust that specifically defined eligible beneficiaries as biological descendants of the trust creators and their spouses. Zoe and Ethan had been systematically excluded from family inheritance considerations before they'd even celebrated their first Christmas with us. Armed with this evidence, I scheduled a family meeting for the following Saturday, telling my parents and Chelsea that I wanted to discuss moving forward constructively after our Thanksgiving misunderstanding. I chose our family home as the location, ensuring I had home field advantage and the ability to record the conversation legally. Marcus arranged for Zoe and Ethan to spend the day with his parents, protecting them from what I knew would be an ugly confrontation, while ensuring they had positive grandparent relationships to rely on. Saturday afternoon arrived gray and cold, matching my mood perfectly. My parents arrived first, both wearing expressions of resigned patience that suggested they expected to endure my emotional overreaction before returning to their preferred family dynamic. Chelsea came 20 minutes later, her confidence from our coffee shop conversation replaced by nervous energy that told me she suspected this wouldn't be a simple reconciliation meeting. I started with the recording from my conversation with Chelsea, playing it in its entirety while watching my parents' expressions shift from confusion to shock to resignation. When Chelsea's voice clearly stated that she'd encouraged the Thanksgiving segregation and viewed my children as threats to her own children's inheritance, Mom actually gasped. "Chelsea, you told us Serafina was overwhelmed and that the children were struggling with behavioral issues," Dad said slowly, his financial planner's mind clearly working through the implications of their recorded conversation. "That's because she is overwhelmed and they are struggling," Chelsea shot back, but her voice lacked conviction. "I was trying to help the family make practical decisions." Then I produced the trust documents, spreading them across our dining room table like evidence in a court case. Practical decisions like amending the family trust to exclude my children from inheritance consideration. Practical like consulting estate planning attorneys about protecting family assets from non-biological claims. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad's face had gone pale and Mom was staring at the documents as if she'd never seen them before, though her signature was clearly visible on several amendments. "You've been planning to exclude my children from family financial benefits since the day their adoption was finalized," I continued, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. The Thanksgiving dinner segregation wasn't about tradition. It was about establishing a public hierarchy that would justify your legal discrimination against them. Mom finally found her voice. "Serafina, you have to understand we have obligations to our biological family members that supersede." "Stop." I held up my hand. "Just stop talking. Because here's what's going to happen next." The silence in our dining room was thick with tension as I laid out the consequences of their actions. My parents sat frozen, Chelsea fidgeted with her purse strap, and I felt the cold satisfaction of finally holding all the cards in a game they'd been playing without my knowledge for 2 years. "First," I began, my voice calm but implacable, "you're going to call every single family member you've contacted about our supposed problems and correct the record." Every lie about financial struggles, behavioral issues, and our inability to handle our children gets retracted with a full explanation of why you spread false information. Mom opened her mouth to protest, but I continued without pause. Second, you're going to remove all discriminatory language from the family trust and estate documents, or my children and I will formally renounce any claim to family inheritance. We don't want money that comes with conditions about their worthiness as family members. Dad's financial advisor instincts kicked in immediately. Serafina, that's not necessary. We can work out equitable arrangements. There's nothing equitable about establishing separate categories for biological and adopted grandchildren, Dad. Either they're full family members with equal standing, or we're not part of this family at all. Chelsea finally exploded. You can't just waltz in here and demand we restructure our entire family financial planning because you decided to adopt random children. Random children, the rage I'd been containing finally broke through. Those random children are your niece and nephew. They call you Aunt Chelsea. Ethan drew you a birthday card last month that you hung on your refrigerator. How exactly did you justify betraying children who love you? I didn't betray anyone. I protected my own children's interests, which is what any responsible mother would do. Marcus, who'd been quietly observing from the kitchen doorway, stepped into the room. Chelsea, what you did wasn't protecting your children. It was teaching them that love is conditional and that some family members are more valuable than others. Is that really the lesson you want them to learn? The question hung in the air because we all knew the answer. Chelsea's children adored Zoe and Ethan. They played together beautifully at family gatherings, shared toys without prompting, and had never shown any signs of viewing their adopted cousins as different or less worthy of love. Mom tried a different approach, switching to her familiar guilt manipulation tactics. Serafina, we've loved you your entire life. We raised you, supported your education, celebrated your marriage. Doesn't that loyalty and history count for something? It counted for everything, Mom. Until you decided that your love came with conditions I couldn't meet, and expectations that required me to accept less for my children than you give to Chelsea's. I pulled out printed copies of text message screenshots I'd gathered from family members over the past week, evidence of the systematic campaign to undermine our family's reputation. Aunt Patricia forwarded me the text you sent her about Ethan's supposed learning disabilities. Uncle James showed me the email where you suggested we might need to return the children if their behavioral problems became unmanageable. Mrs. Chen told me about your conversations regarding legal ways to exclude adopted children from inheritance rights. Each piece of evidence landed like a physical blow. Dad was staring at the table, Mom was crying silently, and Chelsea looked like she wanted to disappear entirely. The most heartbreaking part, I continued, my voice breaking slightly, is that you made these calculations about children who love you unconditionally. Zoe asks about Grandma and Grandpa constantly. Ethan drew pictures of our whole family together, including all of you, for his school's family tree project. They never questioned their place in this family, because I taught them that love doesn't depend on shared DNA. We do love them, Mom whispered, but the words sounded hollow even to her. No, you don't. You tolerate them when it's convenient and exclude them when it's not. Love doesn't come with asterisks and conditions about inheritance rights. Dad finally looked up, his expression defeated. What do you want from us, Serafina? How do we fix this? I want you to decide whether you want to be grandparents to all 4 of your grandchildren, or whether you want to lose access to 2 of them permanently. Because I will not expose Zoe and Ethan to more experiences like Thanksgiving dinner. They deserve better than conditional acceptance from their extended family. Chelsea made one last desperate attempt at justification. You're punishing us for being honest about practical family considerations. Not everyone thinks adoption automatically makes children equivalent to biological family members. Then not everyone deserves access to those children, Marcus replied firmly. Sarah's not asking for special treatment. She's demanding equal treatment for kids who didn't choose their circumstances, but deserve the same love and security as any other child in this family. The meeting ended with no resolution, only ultimatums and hurt feelings. My parents left without making any commitments about correcting their behavior or changing the trust documents. Chelsea stormed out, muttering about how I was destroying the family over political correctness. But within 48 hours, the consequences of their campaign started crashing down around them. Family members who'd learned the truth about the lies they'd been told began confronting my parents directly. Aunt Patricia called Mom and demanded an explanation for why she'd been manipulated into believing false information about her great-niece and nephew. Uncle James sent a scathing email to both parents expressing his disgust at being used as an unwitting participant in isolating children from their extended family. Even family friends began questioning what they'd been told about our supposed struggles. The social pressure was immediate and intense. My parents found themselves having to defend increasingly indefensible positions to people who'd known and loved our family for decades. 3 days after our confrontation, Mom called me in tears. "Serafina, we need to talk. This has gotten out of hand. Has it, Mom? Or are you just upset that people know what you've been doing? We never meant to hurt the children. We were trying to protect family traditions and financial planning, but we realize now that we approached it wrong. It was a start, but I wasn't ready to accept halfway apologies or promises to do better without concrete actions to back them up. The damage they'd done required more than words to repair." 2 weeks after our confrontation, my parents requested another meeting, this time through Marcus rather than directly with me. They'd spent those weeks dealing with the fallout from family members who were appalled by their behavior and facing the reality that their actions had consequences beyond our immediate family. When we met at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant where emotional outbursts would be discouraged by public setting, they came armed with more than apologies. Dad had brought revised trust documents that explicitly included adopted grandchildren as equal beneficiaries, and Mom had prepared a written statement taking full responsibility for spreading false information about our family. "We've contacted everyone we spoke to about your family," Mom said, her voice shaky but determined. "We explained that we were wrong about the children's adjustment and your capabilities as parents. We told them that our concerns were based on our own prejudices and fears, not on any actual problems." Dad slid the legal documents across the table. "I've had our estate attorney remove all language distinguishing between biological and adopted grandchildren. Zoe and Ethan are now designated as full beneficiaries with identical inheritance rights to Madison, Connor, and Harper. It was progress, but I'd learned not to trust words without actions to back them up." "What about Chelsea? Where does she stand on these changes?" Their uncomfortable glances told me everything I needed to know before Dad spoke. She's not happy about the financial changes, but she understands that continuing her previous behavior would mean losing access to the entire family, not just your branch of it." The truth was that Chelsea had been essentially exiled from the extended family social network after her recorded confession became known to relatives. Aunt Patricia had been particularly vocal about her disgust with Chelsea's manipulation of family relationships for financial gain. "She's agreed to family counseling," Mom added hopefully. "We all have, actually. If you're willing to work with us on rebuilding trust." I appreciated the gesture, but my priorities had shifted during the weeks of conflict. While my parents and sister had been dealing with social consequences, Marcus and I had been building something better for our children. We'd grown closer to Marcus's family, who had embraced Zoe and Ethan completely from day one. We'd strengthened friendships with other adoptive families who understood the unique challenges of building families across biological lines. Most importantly, we'd created new holiday traditions that celebrated our chosen family rather than forcing our children to earn acceptance in spaces where they weren't fully wanted. "I appreciate the steps you've taken," I said carefully, "but I need you to understand that earning back our trust will require consistent actions over time, not grand gestures or legal documents." "What would that look like?" Dad asked, his business-minded approach to problem-solving still evident even in family crisis resolution. It looks like you treating my children exactly the same way you treat Chelsea's children. Same birthday gift budgets, same Christmas morning excitement, same bragging to neighbors about their achievements. It means no more private family discussions about adoption-related concerns without including Marcus and me. Mom nodded eagerly. Of course, we want them to feel completely welcome and loved. It also means acknowledging that your previous behavior caused real harm that can't be undone by apologies. Zoe asked me last week why Grandma and Grandpa didn't want to have Thanksgiving dinner with us. 6-year-old children shouldn't have to wonder if their grandparents love them conditionally. The pain that crossed both their faces was genuine, and I felt a flicker of hope that they might actually understand the gravity of what they'd done. Over the following months, my parents made genuine efforts to repair their relationships with our children. They attended Ethan's school play and Zoe's soccer games with the same enthusiasm they showed for Chelsea's children's activities. They included our kids in grandparent bragging sessions with neighbors and friends. They even started learning about adoption positive language and the unique strengths that adopted children bring to families. Chelsea's journey was more complicated. The family counseling revealed deep-seated insecurities about her own worth and place in the family that had been driving her competitive behavior toward our children. She eventually apologized directly to Zoe and Ethan, though it took several more months before her interactions with them felt natural rather than obligatory. The most unexpected outcome was how this crisis strengthened our nuclear family. Zoe and Ethan learned that some people might treat them differently because they were adopted, but they also learned that their parents would always fight for their dignity and belonging. They saw Marcus and me work together to protect their interests without compromising their sense of security. Marcus and I learned that we were capable of setting and maintaining boundaries even with people we loved, and that protecting our children's emotional well-being was worth temporary family conflict. The extended family learned that actions have consequences and that manipulating family relationships for personal gain would not be tolerated or ignored. By the following Thanksgiving, we had rebuilt enough trust to host the entire family at our house with one non-negotiable condition: everyone sat at the same table, no exceptions. Watching my parents interact naturally with all 4 grandchildren, seeing Chelsea's kids play happily with their adopted cousins, and hearing Zoe laugh at Grandpa's terrible jokes felt like a small miracle. The experience taught me that family loyalty shouldn't require accepting mistreatment, and that sometimes the people who claim to love us most need the strongest boundaries to learn how to love us properly. It also showed me that children are incredibly resilient when they know their parents will advocate for them consistently. Most importantly, it reinforced that family isn't just about shared DNA or legal documents. It's about choosing to show up for each other with consistency, respect, and unconditional love. Now, when people ask me about adoption and family acceptance, I tell them that not everyone will understand or support your choices immediately, but the people who truly love you will learn and grow when you give them the opportunity, paired with clear expectations. And if they don't, well, that's their loss, because they're missing out on knowing some pretty amazing kids. So tell me, have you ever had to stand up to family members who were treating your children unfairly? How did you handle protecting your kids while maintaining family relationships? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I love hearing about how other parents navigate these complicated situations. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life family drama tales. Sharing your experiences helps other parents know they're not alone in these struggles. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the family that chooses to love you unconditionally matters more than the family you're born into. Take care.